Hello everyone. Today we're going to continue in Chapter 9, Quadratic Functions, and we are going to work on another way of solving to find the x-intercepts or the roots, and it's called the quadratic formula. And it's really kind of a complicated equation. We're going to fill this in here in a minute, but it actually helps us solve when we can't solve by factoring or the asterisk or box or something like that. So just to go back quickly and think about what are we talking about here, we're actually talking about problems like this where we solve the equation for x. And when we solve this equation for x, when we have an x squared and an x to the first power, we can't just simply get x by itself, manipulate the numbers, and solve because we have an x squared and an x. So what we do is we try to factor it. If there's no greatest common factor and the number in front, a, is 1, then that's when we can look for the simple kind where we look for multiply and add up. So we look for two numbers that multiply to negative 64 and that add up to 12. And we guess and check our way through it, for time's sake, those numbers are 16 and negative 4. 16 times negative 4 gives you negative 64, and when you add, you get 12. So then we just fill those numbers in, and we get x plus 16, and we get x minus 4. And we are trying to find out when does the x value equal 0. So then we use the zero product property. And the zero product property says if you're multiplying two things together and the answer is 0, then one of those has to be 0. So what we do is we basically just find out and we set x plus 16. So when does x plus 16 equal to 0? When does x minus 4 equal to 0? And that gives us our two answers. And most of you do this in your head, I know that, but we would really just subtract 16 from each side, and that's where we get our x equals negative 16. That's one of our answers. And then we add 4 to each side, and we get our x equals 4. So those are our zeros, okay? And rather than doing this whole warm-up review, the second one we would need to use the asterisk or box method because we have a 2 out here in front, okay? Skipping down to the third one though, this is why we have to use the quadratic formula. If you look at this, it looks simple. We got a 1 in front. So we look for two numbers that multiply to 1 and that add up. Let's make that a little bit neater here. And that add up to negative 4. Well, think about that. What numbers multiply to 1? Well, 1 times 1 or negative 1 times negative 1. Well, 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. Negative 1 plus negative 1 is equal to negative 2. None of them equal negative 4. So what we say for this kind right here is that it is not able to be factored or not factorable. Now, some of you may have called this before, oh, there's no solution. Well, it turns out there actually is, and I'm going to show you that. We can find those zeros, we can find the x-intercepts, we can find the values of x when y equals 0, or the equation's equal to 0, by using the quadratic formula. So, the quadratic formula can be used to solve a quadratic when you can't factor it. So, here is the key. It's used to solve when you can't factor, but honestly, some students tell me that they just rather use the quadratic formula because now it will work for everything and they don't have to worry about trying to find a greatest common factor or remember what goes in the box and the box method and the asterisk method and so on. But I will tell you that it's kind of complicated and it's a really long formula. So I'm going to fill in this formula and you're going to want to put this down in your notes. And actually down here, if we were in class, I would be playing this little video for you because it's just a kind of a hokey little song that helps you remember it. But I'm going to sing the song. Sorry, I was in band, not choir, but I do like to sing. I don't know if people like to hear me sing, but I like to sing. So we're going to fill in these values into this kind of equation here. So it says we're really finding the x-intercepts here. We're finding the values of x when y equals 0. And if you're wondering where in the world it comes from, you can go to the end of this blank lesson and it kind of walks you through. But let's just get to it. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a So that is the quadratic formula. And again, used to solve when you can't factor it. Now, here's a trick. Here's a kind of thing to watch out for. If you calculate b squared minus 4ac and it turns out to be negative, that's when there's no solution. Because if you take a look at the square root of 25, that's asking what times itself equals 25. And that would be 5. Actually, or it would be negative 5. So we often write that as it's positive and negative 5, plus or minus 5, okay? But if you take the square root of negative 25 and you think, what times itself equals negative 25? Well, it has to be times itself. And either you're going to get 5 times 5 is 25, which isn't negative, or you'd have to do 5 and negative 5, which does multiply to negative 25, but it's not the same number. It's not the same value. So it doesn't work. Okay, you can't take the square root of a negative number until you get to the imaginary number system, which will come up in Algebra 2. So, quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So, let's take a look at the one that we set up here that was not factorable, and I'll show you how we can actually solve it with the quadratic formula. So your learning target is to use the quadratic formula to solve any quadratic, and there's going to be a homework worksheet out there in Schoology Chapter 9 assignment folder. So here is the quadratic formula. We've already filled it in for you, okay, so follow along, all right? Well, you're filling in ABC. You're filling in ABC from our standard form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So a is the value in front of your squared term. So that's going to be 1 when there's nothing written there. B is the number in front of x, and c is your constant. So now I just plug all those things in. So x equals the opposite of b. Well, my b is negative 4. So, wow, that looked kind of goofy here. Don't forget, we're taking the opposite of negative 4, so you can't just ignore one of those negatives. That's going to end up changing to positive, but we'll get to that later. So we got the opposite of negative 4, negative b, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Well, we're going to take negative 4 and square it. But if I do that on my calculator and I type in negative 4 squared, it's going to take 4, square it, and then take the opposite, and it's going to give us negative 16. Well, we're taking negative 4 squared. Negative 4 times negative 4 is going to be positive 16. So make sure you're including those parentheses. That is a really important point, and it's a common mistake that kids will forget to do the parentheses. Kids will forget that they have to take the opposite of this negative. They'll just ignore one of those. All right, let's get back to plugging stuff in. So negative b minus, we have 4 times our a value, which again is 1, times our c value, which is also 1. And here's another thing people will often forget. All over 2 times a is 1. So after you get done, after you simplify this, a lot of times students will forget to divide by that. So I'm just trying to point out some things to sort of be careful about. So let's keep simplifying. So x equals the opposite of negative 4. Negative negative turns into positive 4. Plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared. That's 16. Then we get minus 4 times 1 times 1 is 4, all over 2. So that's kind of where we're at, okay? And now we got to, and now we got to simplify a little bit more. So 16 minus 4 is 12. So this now becomes x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 12 over 2. Well, the square root of 12 is not a single number. Like the square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 16 is 4. Okay, so we have to use our calculator to get that value. So you type in the square root of 12, and you're going to get a long decimal answer. So I'm going to just kind of do that down here. The square root of 12 is going to give you approximately 3.464, etc., we're going to always round to two places right here. So what this is giving us down here is the square root of 12 is approximately 3.46. That's what we're going to have to use in here. So now we're going to have 4 plus or minus 3.46 all over 2. So that 3.46, that was our square root of 12. We're always going to round that to 2 decimal places. Now we're going to actually end up with 2 answers here, just like when we factored, okay? So what happens is that we have to take this plus and minus separately. So we have to take 4 plus 3.46 divided by 2. That's one of our answers. And we have to take 4 minus 3.46 divided by 2. That's our second answer. So here's where another issue comes in. A lot of students will just type that all into their calculator exactly like they see it. But again, your calculator follows the order of operations, and so it will only be dividing the 3.46 by 2 and not the whole value. So how to avoid that? Well, there's 2 ways you could avoid that. One is to simply calculate all of this first. And this would end up to be 7.46. So when we divide that by 2, that would give us an answer of 3.73. Okay, the other way to take care of that is we could actually enter it in our calculator, but what we need to make sure that we include with this is we could do 4 plus the 3.46 here and have equals. If we type in equals and then divide by 2, when we type in equals, we end up getting that 7.46, and then we just divide it by 2. So those are some little tricky things that come up with the quadratic formula. Let's work on the second part now. For minus 3.46, when I calculate that, that gives me 0.54. So that is 0.54 divided by 2, which is going to give me 0.27. So I just found my zeros. I found my x-intercepts right here using the quadratic formula. So it's complicated, okay? But just take your time. Make sure you're filling in the A, B, and C. Make sure you're trying to simplify it correctly. I will tell you that none of the problems that you encounter today, okay, when you calculate that b squared minus 4ac that we talked about right up here, none of the problems today should work out to be negative under the square root. So work on that, know that, so that you're making sure you're simplifying that part correctly. So I have gone through what you absolutely need to know, and I know these videos get long, so if you think you can go ahead and give this a shot, then I would just stop the video, go into the chapter 9 assignments folder and find the quadratic formula number 1 assignment and start working on it. If you get stuck or things aren't going well, then come back and start the video again, because I'll go through another example or maybe 2 right now live, okay, or through video. I'll also post notes so that you can look at. If you didn't look at the videos, you can maybe just look at and check for some simple mistakes. So those of you that are heading to the homework, have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Those of you continuing on, let's take a look at another one. So we're not going to, well, let's not work on this one because we already factored that one. Let's work on this one. This was another one from the warm-up that we didn't do. And if you take a look at this and we solve by the asterisk or the box method, those methods are right here. Okay, you can take a look at that for review, but here's what we ended up with for answers. I didn't go through that one on the warm-up simply for time's sake, okay? But it will be in the notes. So let's see if we can get those same answers using the quadratic formula. So again, our quadratic formula, we have to remember that we have ax squared plus bx plus c. And our a right here is 2. Our b is 7, and our c is -4. So x equals negative b. Well, here b is positive, so we just have -7 plus or minus the square root. And now we're going to have b squared, which is 7 squared. I'm always going to put that in parentheses, even if it's not negative. So b squared minus 4 times your a value times your c value all over, now all of this is over 2 times a. Okay? So, now we go back and we simplify all of this. So just simplify it in steps. You can combine steps if you want. So negative 7 plus or minus the square root. Now honestly, you can actually enter this entire thing right here in your calculator in one step. And then you can actually jump down and just fill in a single number there. Okay? Or you can do it in parts, because 7 squared would be 49, and then we'd have minus, and 4 times 2 times negative 4 actually gives us negative 32. All over 4. But what happens when we subtract a negative? That changes to plus. So that gives us x equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 81, all divided by 4. So here's what I'm talking about. And this is things you want to practice on your calculator. But if you type all of that into your calculator, okay, you can just jump down here. And what is the square root of 81? On the last example, we had the square root of 12. It was not just a single number. But the square root of 81 is. 9 times 9 is 81. And so here, this is going to go to x equals negative 7 plus or minus 9, all divided by 4. So this one is not as complicated. That's why I decided to put this one in here for those of you maybe just need to step back a minute. So we have negative 7, we have to add 9 and then divide it by 2. So again, we're doing plus, but then we also have to take care of the negative, so we have, or minus, so negative 7 minus 9 divided by 2. So this is going to simplify to 2, let's see, negative 7 plus 9 gives me a positive 2 over 4. I just realized that. I accidentally put the wrong 2a down there. I have it right over here. Again, there's lots of moving parts here, so it's simple to make a mistake. Very easy to make a simple mistake. So 2 over 4 is 1/2. Now I come up here and I get negative 16 over 4, which is our negative 4. And if we go back up here to our answers, they match to the 1/2 and the negative 4 that we already had up here. Right up here. So, quadratic formula. Work on it. Okay? Keep trying to plug things in. I did, one that worked out not so nice, one that worked out nice. Again, you should not get any negatives under your square root when you're doing the homework. So give it a try. Go back and look at the notes, because I'll put some additional example like this one that doesn't work out nice, and another one that does work out nice with the quadratic formula, everything plugged in. So good luck. Have a great weekend. Take advantage of my office hours, or just email and message me. I will get to you periodically throughout the day and even sometimes over the weekend.